And we are live. Hey everyone, Richard Taylor here, Final Cut Pro Radio TV Live. And today we have Paul Lambert from Hedge. And now are you also from, I know you're involved with Postlab, but is it correct to say you're also from Postlab?
Yeah, well, Postlab is a product of Hedge.
Okay, so it's a product of Hedge.
Company.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember I interviewed Jasper before he came with you. Couple years ago, right?
Yeah, 2 years ago. That's right.
2 years ago. There you go. So we got a comment from Jeff Arballo. He says, wow, I actually caught it on time. I've been getting ready for a new production to have been missing the live versions. Of course, it's on Facebook and YouTube and Periscope, so he's been missing the live and catching them up after the fact. So, Paul, let's talk about, I know you got big news about Postlab and Postlab Drive. Let's talk about, before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about a bit about Hedge. So I use Hedge all the time for copying media when I have either camera cards or in this case, I put something on a single drive and I'm making a backup onto two separate drives. So I texted you this week because I wanted to see if Hedge knew that if I add something to this folder that I'm updating, when I copy it over, it knows what's already there. And you said it did, right?
Yeah, it does.
And that's
the detection is throughout Hedge.
That's fantastic. Now, the second question I asked you, what about Final Cut Pro libraries? If I add stuff to the libraries,
that's a good question.
I think it seems like it did. When I asked you that, it seems like, here's the thing. With my Final Cut Pro libraries, I use Pathfinder, right? In Pathfinder, there's a preference that makes the library have a disclosure triangle automatically. It's treat packages as folders. So sometimes I'll add in and out of that library, and it seems like Hedge knew that. I'm not sure if that's the way it's designed.
Yeah, that changes the modification date. So then Hedge knows it's a new version.
Oh,
and there are
okay.
a slew of different characteristics we check on, but modification date is definitely important there.
That's one of the things that it looks at. And what about file sizes or?
Of course, file size, file name, creation date, modification date, checksum.
And checksum, of course. That's the important thing. Permissions too. So we got a comment from Lutz, says hello from Abu Dhabi.
Well, hello to you.
Man Cave Productions, whoever that is. He's on here all the time. He comes on and sees. We have a lot of regulars, of course. Paul says, okay, let me put that up. Yeah, I'll put you up. He said you're a little bit quiet. I just turned you up. I didn't see that, though. I thought I saw you coming through okay. But anyway, so Hedge is used, I know a lot of times people use it in the field, right? With laptops when they're taking camera originals off the cards and making duplicate copies or backup copies. Is that what it's mainly used for, would you say? It's designed for?
I would say it's 50-50 on set and back in the studio. We have companies that are using it to do just on set copies because they're mostly on set. We have companies that are doing it to process ingest, but also companies that are doing both, and they're sort of juggling two workflows: camera cards to hard drive to NAS or to LTO, then with canister. So yeah, basically covers the whole workflow from camera card to archive.
And you developed Hedge because of this, for specifically the checksum is a big deal, right? When you're in the field.
The checksum and the ease of use. It's
the ease of use.
The thing that struck me back in the day, about 7 years ago, there was this documentary in the Netherlands that had 15 cameras, and everybody was really anxious about the data management because it was so much to mentally process that while it's not a hard process at all, it just needs to be rock solid. But
right.
So once you get down to a good user experience, it sort of demystifies it, and then you can finally do something creative again instead of copying files, because nobody got into this business for copying files, I think. So our goal has always been to make software that is so easy to use that you can actually do something else in the meantime.
I can't imagine being on the set of a film production and having the pressure of copying the data off of cameras and making sure the backups and everything are good. That kind of pressure, I mean, I worked at the National Archives and we did live things all the time, but the pressure of making sure the backups are good before you erase the cards, that's pressure for film, right?
It's nerve-wracking.
It's nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And that's exactly
what... It's not a job for humans either.
Well, that's true.
Something computers are good at. That's
true. That's absolutely true. But I mean, to me, it's the pressure. I mean, some of the things we did at the archives, we had, presidents down there, and they're always high pressure, but still, you got to get it done. You got to make sure everything's working smoothly. You rehearse. But that's what it seems like Hedge is exactly what it's made for. At least one of the things, I mean, for on set like that. I mean, I'm just doing it in here in the field, but even for me, I use backup these, 8 terabyte drives to back up my main drives. I work off SSDs, but I always make 2 copies of everything, at least 2, sometimes, more if depending on what I'm working on. And I just use Hedge. I take the folder, put it on the left-hand pane, put the drives in the right-hand pane, and just click go, and it just does it, tells me when it's done, and I feel comfortable that everything's good.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. So is there anything new with Hedge? I know I have a subscription.
Well, it's not a subscription, actually. There's a lot of people thinking it's a subscription, but it's an app. We don't like subscriptions. Okay. It's an app, and you buy a license, and if you feel like we are building useful stuff, then after a year you can renew at a discount so you can get more updates. But we're completely fine with people not updating as well. It's just...
Right.
You shouldn't be forced to keep paying for an app that keeps the same functionality. And we always add functionality several times a year. About 6 times a year we do a large release. We actually have one coming up next month. Or well, that's almost in a few days. But in a few weeks from now, we're going to release presets for Hedge.
So
that's
tell me what that
everybody's been asking for that for years. But the use case you just described, where a company is using Hedge on set, and then you come back to the studio, to the office, and then you need to offload those backups to a NAS or to an archive or to the cloud. And then you need a different type of settings. So that's where presets come in. You can create presets for cameras, you can create a preset for Red, for Sony, and then use a different preset just to make a full backup. And one thing we learned a lot from customers is that, for instance, with Red cameras, you want to have a full copy, or with ARRI. But with a lot of Sony cameras, it depends. Sometimes you just want to drill down to that clips folder that's buried 1,000 levels deep, and you just want to grab the movie files. And sometimes, if you need color science in your workflow, you want to have the complete card. So presets will make it very easy to flip between those settings.
What about a preset to monitor a folder live, adding things to it?
Watch folders. Yeah, that's on
watch folders. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not in there yet, but that's definitely on our wish list.
Yeah, because that's something that I would be doing, is having a watch folder, because I add things to it all the time. When I set up a Final Cut Pro library, some people like to do it internally. Some people like to use external media. I usually use external media, but before I make the library, I make a master folder with the library title. Place the library inside that master folder and place my media inside that master folder. So if I want to back it up, it's one folder. Click, drag. Everything is backed up. Everything is backed up. Have you seen any issues with backing up Final Cut Pro libraries themselves, the actual database, ever with Hedge?
No, not at all. No. It can take quite a while. Especially now we have Postlab in our portfolio. We know a lot more about Final Cut Pro libraries and how they behave. If it's just a library, a plain library, there's no issue at all. But some people are putting their cache in there, their render files, and also all their media, right, and snapshots. And snapshots in Final Cut Pro are huge. And that file count that's inside a FCPX bundle is so large that it's a lot of overhead to copy. So it just takes longer, and it's often a much better workflow to keep your cache and keep your media outside of your library.
That's a great point. I usually typically do anyway. So I have a 2019 Mac Pro that I absolutely love. And I have a 2 terabyte internal drive that's very fast, the internal one. But I also have 2 NVMe drives, SSDs. One of them is internal on a PCIe card, which is also very fast. And then I have an external one. I have a Thunderbolt 3, it's a tiny little thing. Actually, I got it right here. It's this is what it is. Pulled it in focus. It's a cube, but it's true Thunderbolt 3, and that's also very fast. So those are the drives that I actually work on. I have 6 terabytes that I actually work active project. I also have a RAID for bigger projects, but I make backups of everything on there before I start. I may capture there initially, but before I start, I always make backups onto 2 separate other hard drives with Hedge. That's exactly what I do.
That's smart thinking.
Yeah. Because how many times people on the different forums, and they're saying, "Oh, I lost my media, or my library's this." And I said, "Well, use your backup media." "Well, I didn't make any backup media." "Oh, come on." That's
here's a performance tip for Final Cut Pro. A lot of people think you need to put the media on the fastest drive you have.
Right.
But it's actually the cache that you want to put on the fastest drive you have.
Okay.
So if you're short on fast storage, be sure to put your cache on there and not even the media.
Okay.
Final Cut Pro flies with a fast cache drive.
That's great. That's a great tip.
Internal drives are super fast with Apples nowadays.
They are. They're faster than the ones I buy off the shelf. So why is a snapshot large? I didn't realize that. I thought that was just like part of the database.
Yeah, but it's a lot of files.
Is that right? I mean, so tell me, so a snapshot is basically a project, right?
Yeah, it is. And it has a multiplier in there. It has multiple versions. If you have a workflow that relies on the snapshot functionality from Final Cut Pro, it easily bloats. And that's why Postlab doesn't work with snapshots, but Postlab uses a much more lightweight mechanism to manage those versions.
Oh, that's interesting. We'll get into that in a minute. So the snapshot, if I had 2 snapshots, that wouldn't be that large, would it?
No, that will be okay.
If you have a bunch of, you're talking about if you had dozens of snapshots, because each one's a separate project, right?
Yeah.
One of the new features in Final Cut Pro 10.4.9 is save project as, or duplicate project as, I forget which it was. Maybe it's both. And you can now choose to do a vertical video version, a square version. You have all the new fantastic ways to make proxy media now that we've been asking for years. H.264 is great. I've wanted that for so long, and then also different resolution sizes. So one of the things that I ran into, I was doing a anamorphic project last night, and I wanted to make proxy media of all the anamorphic. And it was 4K, was it 4K? Yeah, it's 4K, or UHD, one or the other. And so I took all the clips, made proxy versions, and I couldn't remember if I made the proxies. I did H.264. I couldn't remember if I made them 100% resolution or 50%. I couldn't remember. And I was looking at the timeline and saying, well, this quality is pretty good. Did I make them 50%? Did I make them 100%? I can't tell in Final Cut Pro what size the proxies are.
Well, follow radar, and maybe the improvement will come.
Well, I will now. Well, here's the thing. Prior to what I did was, reveal proxy in Finder. That's another new feature of 10.4.9. Reveal proxy in Finder. Did a get info. I also dropped it on Invisor. I think that's the one that I use. And I have media info and Invisor both, and they both break down all the details of the video clip. And it kept saying, okay, it's 50%. And I kept going back to Final Cut Pro. I went to the browser. I went to the timeline, and it kept reporting the original file frame size. And then I found out that's because of conforming. If you work with another, Final Cut does that intentionally. They keep the original data. Even though it says proxy beside it, it doesn't give you 50%, 25%, 12.5%. So there's no way in Final Cut to know once you make proxies, at least that I've been able to find. I couldn't find it in the browser, couldn't find it in the inspector. So then I found out that that's intentional. So that's a request. Just, of course you keep the original resolution, but somewhere in that smart database, make a little checkbox or little thing that says original or proxy size, or even if you have the original resolution at the top of the browser, top of the inspector, and it says proxy, put beside it 50%, 25%, 12.5, something to let you know that this is not the size of the proxy file. Because I couldn't remember. Did I do 100%?
I think this is a typical example of the struggle that UX designers have between informing the user enough, their decision process enough, and on the other hand, preventing feature bloat and cramped software and bad interfaces. And I think Apple strikes a pretty good balance between giving a lot of information and not making it too cluttered either.
Right. But I always bring up the point that Logic has an advanced set of features for advanced users. So if you want it simple, you turn the advanced features off. But sometimes professionals need some advanced things. And I think Final Cut could do the same thing. They should have a set of advanced features for advanced people. I understand both points of view, but sometimes, like the automatic white balance, when you do that, there's no controls. It's either on or it's off. Either you do it or you don't. Well, it's doing something. It's doing something.
To give an example, this also applies to what we do with Hedge a lot. We've been getting requests for presets for ages, but we always ran into some UX issues that we couldn't really really pull it together into something very, very simple. And now we finally been able to do it. So now it's up to par with our standard of user experience. To give an example, a lot of software that works preset based forces you to use a preset even if you don't want to use presets. There's always a default preset or first preset or anything like that. And that's sort of bad UX. Like if you use software as is, not advanced, but as is, it shouldn't bother you with the advanced details. And the other way around as well. But how do you make that switch? That's hard. And just letting a user flip from simple mode to advanced mode, that is kind of, that's a bad approach in UX lingo.
Well,
so it's really hard to do this right.
It works in Logic. And the thing is that if somebody, a beginner or, somebody who doesn't want it, it's not turned on by default. You have to know it's there and you have to turn. As a matter of fact, in Logic, there's a master checkbox and like 6 or 7 things underneath. You can check off each one of those by themselves for advanced features. Of course, I always have it on for the most part. So let's go on to Postlab. So is there anything else? So you have the presets coming for Hedge, which I'm really excited about. And I think, let me think. Yeah, I bought it for the last 2 years. I think I'm good till like about December or so. And then I'll renew it because I use it all the time. There's some applications that I just find invaluable, and Hedge is absolutely one of them. I just feel so much better copying my media, knowing that it's being checksummed and knowing there's an app that's simple, drag and drop, and does the job, period. And if there's any errors, it'll report it, has a log and everything. So I really, really like Hedge is one of my main featured apps that I use with Final Cut Pro all the time. There's a couple of other ones as well. So let's move on to Postlab then. So you had an announcement this week to coincide. Did it coincide with 10.4.9, Final Cut Pro 10.4.9?
Well, sort of. We of course made sure we were compatible with 10.4.9 on the day of release. So we had the release lined up. And we think the new proxy workflow is amazing. And with Postlab's relink prevention feature, it allows you to, for instance, you're working on original media and you're sending off a project to me, a library, and I can be working on the H.264 versions without having to relink. So for us, that was quite it's one of those invisible features that we like, just like duplicate detection that you mentioned before. It's like we like it to work as expected,
right,
and only amazing you when you're actually thinking, did something happen there just? And it just works.
Right.
So that's the way we like to build features. So we think that proxy workflow for remote teams, for multiple editors working at the same time on the same libraries, is really amazing. The biggest issue, of course, with working from home that has appeared the last couple of months is how are we going to get the media to everyone?
Right.
Are we shipping hard drives? Are we using SneakerNet, or are we using cloud-based services? And all of them have their disadvantages. So we started about 6 months ago. We started working on a project we call Drive, which released today, a few days after Final Cut Pro.
Okay.
Because we wanted to build shared storage. Everybody just wants to have shared storage.
Absolutely.
But have it everywhere. So it's shared storage in the cloud, which behaves just like it's a hard drive sitting next to you. And the beauty of shared storage is that you don't have to download files first before playing back. You can play back them in line, and it requests just those pieces from the files that you need. And that's what Postlab Drive does. So Postlab Drive really helps cut down on all the traffic you need, and it really helps you not need your internet connection. Not everybody has a 1 gig internet connection, so it really helps.
I don't.
If you just download whatever you need and nothing else. And that's what Postlab Drive aims to do.
So I'm presuming the Postlab Drive is on your servers somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a worldwide network of servers, which we already built for Postlab. So we have 3 regions: San Francisco, New York, and Amsterdam currently.
Okay.
And a Postlab team is on one of those locations, which you decide on when you sign up, whatever is closest to you. And we matched Postlab Drive servers to those locations. So it's always close. It's always much faster than having to grab data from platforms that just have one large data center in one location.
Okay. So Postlab, it's kind of meant for collaboration with other editors, right?
Yeah.
Is there any benefit to a single editor? Is there any workflow for a single? I mean, for me, I'm thinking, well, if I'm working 2 different places, it'd be better than hauling, drives back and forth and stuff. Because I work 2 different places sometimes.
That's the obvious use case, of course.
Right.
We have quite a lot of single person teams in Postlab, people with an office and a home place, or multiple computers in the office, and they just use Postlab as their project management, if you will, like versioning. There's backups in there. We archive everything, so it's sort of making sure we have your back, even if you're on your own, so you don't need an assistant maybe for all those jobs. With Postlab Drive, it also becomes really easy to share LUTs, for instance, and fonts and plugin installers.
Oh, okay.
So you can use Postlab Drive as your central place to put everything you need to roll out a computer. So let's say you're going to a facility, which, currently nobody is doing, but back in the day, you could easily need to go to an edit set and need to carry a hard drive and then install everything you have. And, I forgot this and I forgot that. If you just store everything on Drive, you always have your LUTs with you. And now with Final Cut 10.4.9, it's also really easy to apply those.
Yeah. It seems like there are some people that Apple was working with. Well, I know they took, I talk to the Final Cut Pro team all the time at the Creative Summit, and they always tell people that we read every single request that comes in. Doesn't mean we're going to incorporate every single request, but they read them. They have somebody that's full-time that reads all the requests. And I know this whole proxy thing, it's been years, people requesting H.264 and different resolutions, and finally we got it. The curious thing to me is, from the outside, that they incorporated this in 10.4.9 and didn't wait till the next big update. I'm going to presume it's 10.5 or 11, whatever. this is a big feature. And I'm glad. I mean, I'm really glad. And I've been saying all along, if 10.5 or whatever, the next version's not ready, give us what is ready right now for the Intel Macs before, the Silicon Macs come out and stuff. And that's exactly what they did. I was kind of surprised that they did it in August, but pleasantly. It was a pleasant surprise. So we have a couple of questions here, and this is probably one you get a lot. Jeff Arbaio says, can Paul explain how Postlab collaboration works and how it might be different from Frame.io? I'm sure you get that all the time, don't you?
We do. And we're very good friends with Frame.io, actually. And
right.
We think the two together are the best of both worlds. The way we explain it often, together with Patrick Southern from Frame.io, he uses Postlab all the time.
Right.
Is Frame.io is for collaborating with your customers, like for reviewing your edits, getting their comments into Final Cut Pro or into Premiere, and then processing those and then shooting off a new edit to a customer, having that feedback loop working. But if you are working together with your editors, with your colleagues,
right,
then Frame.io, you're not reviewing each other's work. You're working on an edit and someone else is working on a different part of the edit, and then later on you're consolidating, and then you're doing a master edit, and then you're finishing.
Right.
That's what Postlab is for. So with Frame.io, you collaborate on exports, on video, on the actual footage.
Okay.
With Postlab, you collaborate on your analyze files. So you have your Final Cut Pro libraries in there, or your Premiere projects. And we're working on Avid and Resolve support as well for later this year, maybe next.
Okay.
And that's what Postlab is aiming to make easy. Like we bring together your colleagues, and we make it very easy to hand off work internally. Like, you're gonna start working on this, I finished that, and let's consolidate that into a new project. Give you an example, Jasper, the inventor of Postlab, used to work at this Dutch broadcaster.
Right.
And they have 20 factual shows at the same time.
Wow.
Always. And they have about 400 editors. And we're all working within Postlab, but apart from original content, they also had to do a lot of reruns over the course of the years.
Okay.
And with Postlab, it made it super easy for them to just jump back into a version that was aired 2 years ago and drop in new titles or new graphics.
Right.
Or take a piece and do a new edit, for instance. Or jump back into let's say you need something becomes topical and you need some footage from a previous episode, but you just don't need the shot. You want the actual edit. That's what Postlab makes easy. So whereas with Frame.io you work on the video itself, and it has proxy generation and review tools, Postlab is ideal for working together with your editors.
I think that's a very good explanation on how that works. So Scott Simmons wrote an article review for Postlab. He asked me to put it up. I'll put the link up there. He's on Pro Video Coalition, of course. And you were featured on the Apple page, right?
I was.
Was that a surprise, or did you know in advance that was going to happen? Because a lot of people, when they see themselves on an Apple page, they act like, wow, thanks a lot, I didn't know, or it seems like they didn't know. Did you know in advance you were going to be on there, or it just showed up and you were like,
no,
wow?
Not in that capacity, no.
Oh, okay.
No, definitely not. We work very closely with the Apple Pro Video team. Right. Postlab is the sole way to collaborate with Final Cut Pro, so that's a logical match.
Sure.
We knew something was going to happen, but you never know the details. And we are very, very humbled by that mention. Definitely.
Right.
It's a life goal achieved.
So is Hedge going to be affected with Apple Silicon? I mean, is that going to affect Hedge at all? It's because it's a different OS, right? I mean, it's a little different. I know it's Universal 2, but it's not going to have any effect.
We have it running right next to me. I can't show you, but it's running.
Right. You have one of the developer Mac Minis that they put out. Huh. Have you seen, so you've seen the silicon version of the OS. Is it that different from the Intel version at this point? Or is it pretty much kind of the same, feature-wise and performance-wise, or?
I can't say.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, okay. Well, here's the thing. From the outside, it seems like it should be better. I mean, otherwise, why switch? If it's not going to be better than the Intel version, at some point. I mean, not initially. I understand initially. They have not released a Mac Silicon yet. They said by the end of the year, Tim Cook said, the first Mac will be released. I don't know if it'll be a Mac Mini or a MacBook or something low end. It's not going to be my Mac Pro. I know that. So,
not from the get-go, maybe, but the developer kit is a Mac Mini form factor,
right?
And so maybe that's an indication of what they'll do. I don't know, actually.
Yeah, the easy stuff. Yeah,
but I think if you look back at how iOS integrated with iPhone and iPads after Apple acquired PA Semi, which is, I think, maybe already nearing 10 years ago. The leap forward they made after that acquisition, when they started doing their own silicon,
right?
I think we can expect the same kind of leap forward.
Right.
And I'm by no means a silicon designer at all.
Right, I understand.
I do understand the gain you can make when integrating software specifically with hardware.
Right.
So I'm guessing we'll see quite some gains there.
Yeah, initially maybe not as much when they first start, because one of the things they don't want to do, I mean, most Final Cut Pro editors are going to be on Intel Macs for years and years because they're not going to have the Pro machines initially. And even if they introduced the most popular Mac for editing, Final Cut Pro, by far is the MacBook Pro, the 15-inch, 16-inch now. Apple's told us that many times at the Creative Summit. By far, 60% or 70% of the editors use the MacBook Pro. So even if that one comes out, everybody's not going to drop their current Intel versions and buy that on day one. Maybe 10% might. It depends on your buying cycle. But people are going to be using Intel Macs for years yet. Tim Cook has said we will have Intel versions of the OS for years, plural. That means more than one. So for at least 2 more years, they're going to have Intel versions. The Final Cut Pro, which is what I care about, is also a Universal 2 app. It means it works on both platforms. And I expect it somewhat to be feature parity between the two versions. I understand Silicon's going to have some things that Intel doesn't have, probably more going forward than perhaps the initial. The initial version of Silicon, I expect it to be on par or a little bit better than the Intel. But as it's developed further, I expect it to get further and further ahead, I would think. Not being like you said, I'm not a Silicon developer either. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think it will pick up slowly at first and then accelerate, definitely.
Right.
Just look at the switch to Intel.
Right, from PowerPC?
Yeah. I happily worked on a PowerBook for years while also having an Intel machine, and no struggle at all.
Right. So same with me. I have a PowerPC G5 downstairs, and I have an old cheese grater Mac that I just brought it out of storage and brought it back online because I have reel-to-reel decks down there, multi-track recording decks that I brought back, and everything is built around that Mac Pro. All my interface, auto interface, and it's really, really interesting on what OS I can use, what version of what software I can use to make everything work. But I got it up and running again. Plus, I'm digitizing VHS tapes, and that's all also downstairs. So, because I have all the hardware set up, it all worked. I just took it out of commission, and everything's working now. So, it's interesting though. I had to go back to Final Cut Pro 7 for some of the VHS stuff. That was very odd, to say the least. So Jeff Arbio says, thanks for that response. Does Postlab work in any RAID system, or do you need something like a QNAP where someone can log into the drives from a remote location?
No, there is no local storage needed at all. It's a cloud service which syncs with your local computer with a desktop app. So you always work from your libraries locally, not directly from the cloud.
Oh. Okay.
And cloud Postlab Drive mounts as if it's a hard drive, but it just lives in RAM and locally with a cache. And yeah, just like Final Cut Pro works with every storage, then so does Postlab, because Postlab doesn't interfere with Final Cut Pro. It just observes. We only observe Final Cut Pro. We only observe Premiere, and then we detect changes. We save just the changes. And then when you decide to go back a few versions, for instance, if you were on the previous version of Final Cut Pro and you just upgraded to 10.4.9 and then opened a library from within Postlab and it didn't work for you, you could just roll back to the previous version, which you can't do without Postlab. You need to zip stuff and kinds of stuff. So if Final Cut Pro supports it, we support it.
Yeah, that's very true with the different versions. I mean, I've seen half a dozen people this morning say, either my Final Cut Pro updated automatically. Well, there's a setting in preferences, you prevent that. And I can't, it's crashing or whatever. And I would say, just here's the article. Apple told you to update your library. Make a copy of your current library and the application before you update to a new version. When you launch Final Cut 10.4.9 for the first time, if you have an old library, it tells you you can't open this new library in the old version of Final Cut. You cancel if you don't want that to happen. But anyway, I understand everybody doesn't see that, but I started posting that a couple days ago. Back up your Final Cut Pro version. I have versions all the way back to 10.0. I learned that a long time ago.
What Postlab does as well is that we detect which version you are on. So if you're coming from an old version, then you can and jump to 10.4.9, then we know where you're coming from. So you can always jump back and it will warn you this is an older version. And you can keep templates within Postlab for all those versions. So if you need, for instance, 2 years later, you need to go back to 10.4, you can open that template from 10.4 and just continue working in that version.
Wow.
You don't necessarily want to, if you go back to an old show, you don't want to necessarily update that library. You probably want to run that in the Final Cut Pro version it was built in.
Right.
So you keep the apps zipped, and then you're always sure that you can open within the version you were editing with.
So one of the things you call is Time Machine 2.0, Postlab. And that's what you're talking about. That's a great way to describe it. So the Postlab drive, you said it's stored, some of it's stored in RAM and a cache file on your local drive, a local machine, but you're still dependent on your internet connection speed somewhat, at least initially. Is that how that works? So
yeah, and more so latency.
Okay.
The big difference between Postlab Drive and all other cloud storage there is that they are all file-based, while actual storage is block-based. Your hard drive, your NAS, SAN, your RAID, it's all block storage. If you drop in a large video file on your timeline and you skip to the half of it and you start playing back, your editor doesn't need to request that first bit that you skipped. It skips right to what you need. And that's what Postlab Drive does as well. So you start playing back halfway in a file, then just that bit is fetched that you need for playing back. And that is saved locally. So you don't need to re-download it.
Right.
That would be a waste of download speed, right? But because each time you hit play, a new request has to be made. And every second or so, or frame or so, a new request is made to fetch the next block. Latency is more important than actual speed, because the speed, most internet connections
are fast enough.
Quite a high frame rate, but latency can be a boon. And it definitely helps with Postlab Drive and with, not even just with Postlab Drive, with everything you do online to use Ethernet instead of Wi-Fi.
Right. I have both, of course, on the Mac Pro. It's 10 gig Ethernet, I believe. Yeah. Yes. I think there's two of them.
Well, even if you use 10 gig Ethernet and your connection is only 20 Mbit, for instance, your outside connection, that still helps a lot because Wi-Fi has a lot of latency overhead.
Right.
But that's my pro tip to everyone. Use wired internet wherever you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that they mentioned post WWDC, they didn't mention it at WWDC, but post WWDC, is the developer Mac Mini that they are distributing does not have the chip that's going to ship with the first Silicon Mac. It has the iPad Pro AZ something, A12Z chip, but they made a point to say that is not the chip that's going to ship when they finally ship the first Mac with silicon. So that means it's obviously going to be a more advanced, more powerful chip specifically. People, when they saw that they were using the iPad chip, some people said, oh, well, it's Final Cut Pro is coming to the iPad. No, that's not what that says. They're using the chip. They're not using iOS or iPad OS. iPad OS and Mac OS are two different things. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that. But it's different. Getting Final Cut Pro running on iPad OS is I'm sure, is a challenge. It's not just the hardware.
Yeah, it's not just, well, it's a matter of compiling it. Where does it compile and how do you want the user experience to be?
Right.
I think, personally, an iPad Pro 12-inch would be amazing to have Final Cut Pro running on. But that doesn't mean you can just copy it from one machine to the other.
Right.
We have, little scoop here, Hedge for iOS is coming.
Oh, it is?
Soon. It is. We could have built that as a universal app, but that doesn't make sense at all because you need to fine-tune the copy engine to the hardware.
Okay.
And just copying Hedge's copy engines, we have about 5 in there right now, to iOS doesn't make sense at all. So we build a new copy engine just for iOS.
So when you're saying Hedge for iOS, does that mean from an iPhone to a Mac hard drive?
Well, most used would be, I think, iPad OS. So you would connect a camera card kit to it and a hard drive on USB-C, or you would drop off your cards directly to the internal memory of the iPad.
Oh,
Phil
I
Persson
see.
Has been using it for his journal shoots, and he's dropping red cards straight onto the iPad, and then in the evenings he makes a wireless connection to, I believe, Synology, and then he propagates it to there.
Because the iPad's 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte storage right now. It's because my phone, my iPhone 11 Pro Max, I have 512 on this, because I can fill that up pretty quickly shooting 4K. Especially if I'm using Filmic Pro, the high frame rates of Filmic Pro and stuff, it fills up pretty quickly, so I got to keep getting it off. So
there's a nice segue. Back to Postlab Drive, actually. We think it's always a bit weird to need an account for your customer. If your customer needs to download data from a cloud service or need to upload data to your drive,
right,
it's silly that you need an account or a login or a complex thing. So what we did together with Postlab Drive is build our own WeTransfer service into it and out.
Oh, okay.
And that also works on iOS. So within Postlab, within Drive, in Postlab, you can create what is called a drop-off link. And that's just an URL, and you can send it to anyone you want or yourself. Open that link on your iPhone and then drop in your Filmic Pro clips straight to Drive, for instance.
So that's a exclusive announcement, Hedge for iPad OS.
It is.
Is it going to be this fall or a little later, or is it ready pretty quickly?
This quarter, we're hoping, yeah. Well, this quarter ends in a few days, so next quarter.
Okay. Very interesting. I'm excited. I mean, like I said, I use Hedge all the time. It's just one of my favorite apps. So Lutz says, is Postlab Drive a subscription? I'm sure it's something like that, right?
Yeah, with cloud services, you need to do that. Yeah, Postlab is a subscription. We have plans ranging from $9 per month to $25. And Postlab Drive is included with the middle tier and the highest tier. So you get 100 gigs for free with the Pro plan.
Okay.
And a terabyte with the Team plan. But you can also get Drive as a standalone subscription, and the
Right.
cost is $30 per terabyte per month.
Okay. So when I worked with Brad Olson on the Final Cut Pro documentary Off the Tracks, so if I was working with an editor, I can just subscribe for a certain amount of months while I'm working on the documentary, and then when it's over, I can unsubscribe. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, you can pause your team or even delete your team. But we have quite a lot of customers that use it on a per project basis, and they just kick it off for a month or 2 or 3 and then pause the subscription. And then when you get back, everything is there.
Right. So that's fantastic. That's a good way to do things. We have another comment that says, it's always scary working on a huge project a year or two and hoping the update doesn't break your library. So that's very true. But besides Postlab, which takes care of that for you with the Time Machine 2.0 feature, please make a copy of your application and your libraries before you update. That's, that helps. That helps a lot. I forget who it was asking for somebody if they had the original version of Final Cut, and I happen to have it on. I have this old, thick, 1-inch thick MacBook Pro. I went there and I found it. So let me see. Alex says, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Final Cut Pro 10 workflow with the iPad similar to what Premiere Rush does across platforms. I don't know. Final Cut Pro on the iPad, I think it'll be there eventually. I don't think that it's going to be there this year. Some people expected it at WWDC, but it wasn't even mentioned, of course. I think that's a little ways out yet. Apple's got their hands full. First off, the Final Cut Pro team's got their hands full. Not only do they have to deal with people like us making requests to them all the time, they got to deal with Apple corporate. They got to deal with bunch of different layers. They're not independent. They can't do things the way they may perhaps would like to. They have to adhere to whatever Apple corporate tells them as far as release schedules and stuff. So 10.4.9, we all appreciate that. Is the proxies, the way they've reworked proxies, and you can make a proxy only library, you can make a library with no media, are those the biggest things for Postlab, would you say? The biggest improvements?
Yeah, our relink prevention already was quite useful to Postlab users, but now that you can work on all different flavors of proxies, that really finishes it.
So I have a question you may or may not know the answer to, or may not have an opinion on. I've seen some bugs reported with Final Cut Pro 10.4.9. If they release a bug fix for it, will it be 10.4.10?
Good question.
Or will it be, they just say re-download 10.4.9? Because, I think there's a couple of things that I'm seeing. I'm collecting those, so I have a collection so I can see what, some of them are probably user error, some of them are third-party plugins and things that aren't working. But it seems like there's too many that they're going to have to release a bug fix. And Final Cut has done that at least twice in the past 5 years, where they put out a major update and had a bug fix within 30 days. So I'm thinking maybe they're going to do a 10.4.10, which would be the highest version number of any version of Final Cut Pro 10 ever. The last was... They're tied now as 10.0.9 before 10.1 came out. And now they're at 10.4.9, so they're tied at that point.
I have a theory there, Richard.
Tell me.
If you look at Big Sur,
yes,
the version number for Big Sur on Intel is 10.x. But it's said that the version number on Silicon will be 11 dot something.
Oh, you're
right. So maybe
right.
they're doing the same thing for Final Cut. I don't know, but...
You're right.
So maybe we'll have 10.4 on Intel and 10.5 on Silicon?
Okay. Or 10, Final Cut 11.
I generally don't know, but that would make sense.
Oh, there you go. So you think when the Apple's... Because Big Sur's it's not out in the public yet, just the betas are out. So you think when it's actually released, it's going to stay 11? Or is
I recall there was some mention during WWDC that Big Sur on Silicon was macOS 11.
And you think the Intel version is not going to be 11? The Intel version of Big Sur?
Well, I have that running. That's not 11.
No, I know now it's not in the beta. Won't that be?
You mean they'll bump it? Yeah, that could be. But that's
because it's confusing, though, to the public, isn't it? 11 on one platform and 10.16 or whatever the heck it is.
On the other hand, we are extremely nitpicking.
No, I know.
The public really doesn't care which version number it is, as long as it works. So,
so we got I'm sure it's a comedic comment. Will Final Cut Pro 11 be a free update? Well, we don't know if it's going to be Final Cut Pro 11. We don't know if it's going to be Final Cut Pro 10.5. And we don't know if it's going to be free because it's been free up to this point. I would say probably, but I certainly wouldn't say 100%. I mean, at some point, Apple could charge for an update, especially if it's a major update, which it seems like this next one is going to be. 32 months? 10.4 is, at this point, 32 months old. It's the oldest version of Final Cut Pro 10 in history. Average time is 16 months. There's been 114, 116, 118, so the average time is 16 months. This one is now 32. Huh?
There is no predictability in cycles. We've done major releases within weeks, and we've done major releases within 6 months too. It just depends on what you're doing. And a question for you, because I wasn't around, I think, back then. I was still a sound engineer. About 100 years ago, Final Cut Pro released version 7. Was that a paid upgrade from 6?
Yes. Every time they went to a full number update, it was paid. What wasn't paid was just the point 0, 0.3, point whatever. Yeah, but it was Final Cut Studio, Final Cut Studio 2, Final Cut Studio 3, and 7 was unless I'm recalling incorrectly, I'm sure it was a paid upgrade from 6 to 7 because people were complaining that it wasn't that much of a difference between 6 and 7. I mean, I want the Final Cut Pro team to have money. That's what I want them to have money, and it's a different team now than it was then, I'm sure. So he says Alex says his Big Sur public beta says 11 beta. 11, and that's got to be on Intel.
I got the Big Sur public beta here. Oh, it's 11. Yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
It's 11. Yeah. So, well, there goes the theory.
well, it seems like they started with that 10 point something and then 11, but yeah. Yeah, like I say, when they release it to the public, it seems like it would be confusing. Which version do I get? Which version do I get? And I know the App Store would know. I mean, they absolutely would know which version belongs on your machine. When I down to one of my downstairs studio, my old Mac Pro, I updated to 10. I can only go up to 10.8.6 down there because of the hardware. I have a PCIe card that only was supported. The drivers are only supported. It was a Mo2 card. Because I got 24 channels of 24-bit audio in and out on that machine down there. Just plug it in, plug tape decks in, plug whatever I want in. So it's still running. So I'm keeping it. And it runs good. It runs fine.
Don't you think it's kind of funny that
Yes.
Our biggest issues are version numbers?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Because I was trying to see what I could. And then the other thing was when I was digitizing VHS tapes, I have a AJA IOHD box that connects via FireWire 800. And that is even more restrictive on what OS it'll work. That's how I'm digitizing the VHS tapes. It has all the analog in and outs and everything. And it's very peculiar. I don't remember it being that difficult back in those days, but nowadays everything's a little fussy. I got to stay with it as I'm digitizing and make sure it doesn't have a hiccup, and then it stops. All right. Is there anything we did not cover? Any questions? We had the questions about the subscription. The Postlab Drive is a subscription. Of course, that's the only way you can do on, stuff like that with servers online. Where Hedge is not a prescription, not a subscription. You buy the app, and then if you want the updates, you buy the updates if and when you need them. But the other thing is, I always support developers that I that I use all the time, of course, Hedge is one. Hedge is one of the ones. Some of the other ones I don't do as often, but I wait for certain features to come or whatever. But other developers, I just automatically, if I don't use the app, I just automatically update them. I mean, I pay for the update, whatever. I want them to have money to keep on developing stuff. So
there's actually quite some thinking behind that system. The problem with the subscription is that it's if you stop paying for it, the service goes. So it's a service. It's not a product. And buying a software license, you're not actually buying the product itself. It's still a license, but it doesn't cost us a thing apart from support, where you are buying a product. So it should stay working if you decide to cut ties with us. Let's say for some reason you don't want to talk to us anymore. That doesn't mean the product should stop working. So it has to be a single-off purchase. But the good thing, I think, about paid updates, the way we use it, that you get a year of updates or more, depends on what you pay in advance, is that we need to build the features that you need. Because otherwise you are not going to renew. Instead of what a lot of software does is they already make money off of you. So now they need to find new people to make money off. So they build features for that audience instead of for you. And we try to cater for our audience. So we build the features you want and that you request. And we get feature requests in droves. So that really helps. Send us your ideas.
You do?
And then we build them. Yeah,
you do? People request things all the time. I'm sure they do.
20 each day, at least.
I'm sure.
And it's a funny thing, though. There's a very logical progression in our updates thanks to that. Because we always, when we release something, there's sort of an internal joke going on within the company, like an internal bet on what's going to be the next feature that everybody's going to request. Because it's a logical progression. If we can do this, then we like to be able to do this. And that's what we'll build. So we're building together with our users instead of building something out of the blue.
Now, without putting you on the spot, can you please explain your method of your app and subscriptions to Adobe?
Sorry, what does that mean?
With Adobe, if you don't pay the subscription, the app stopped working.
Oh, yeah. But that's a business decision.
Right.
And
but that's what I'm saying. Right.
Yeah. They have the momentum to do that. We could do that as well, but I think we'd lose a lot of our customer base overnight.
Well,
and so did it. And so did Adobe, actually.
Yes.
I think if you would count all the pirated Photoshop copies and then count all the subscription they right now are having, it's still a decimation of users. But 90% of those users weren't paying. So it's a success for them.
Right. As far as I understand, it's for a stockholder, it's good. As far as, users of Adobe software, I was one until they started this subscription model, which I'm not going to support. I just don't believe in that. For an application I'm talking about. The fact that your app stops working. You can't freeze a copy of the app at the current version. If you stop paying, your apps will stop working. The other problem with Adobe stuff is 2 times in the last couple of years, their servers were down and people couldn't edit because they couldn't connect to confirm whatever that nonsense is. That's another issue with that. But anyway.
That's the reason why we built Postlab to work off local copies. Postlab always works locally. Even if our servers are down, the app itself will have a hard time connecting, of course.
Right.
But you can still dig into our Postlab bundles, and there will be copies of your libraries. So you can always continue working.
That is a fantastic feature. That really is a big deal.
Yeah, we hate vendor lock-ins. That's sort of deeply ingrained in our DNA. We've been Pro Tools users for years as sound engineers. Right. We don't want to do that. So we always build everything we do with a policy of no vendor lock-in. Give you an example. We just released an update to Canister, which is a super niche product for LTO archives.
Okay.
The problem with LTO is that it takes a lot of time to mount a tape and then to index that tape. So if you want to find a file, ideally, you don't want to feed it the tapes. You just want to have some kind of database.
Right.
So that's what all the apps in the space do. They build a big database of all your tapes, whatever you put on them and when. But databases go corrupt. They always do, because that's what happens inevitably. Just like video files. File goes corrupt. Sooner or later, everything goes corrupt. So we've been looking for years for a system to not having to use a database, because a database is always also a vendor lock-in.
Okay.
That information is locked up in a database. It's possible to get it out there, but you need to dig in, and if you don't have the software, it's pretty hard to do.
Okay.
So with Canister, we built a new technology called Catalogs, which creates a virtual copy of your tape and mounts that as if it's mounted.
Okay.
Like network drive. So you have a network server that lists all your tapes, and you can browse them, you can use Spotlight for it, and you can tag them. So you have your complete LTO archive available without needing Canister, without any chances of corruption, because it's just Finder. If Finder continues to work, then Catalogs continues to work. And that's sort of, for us, the ideal no vendor lock-in policy.
So you said you use Pro Tools. Now, I thought that they had a subscription and a non-subscription version of that. Do they?
I quit using it way before it went subscription.
But don't they have both? Don't they have both? You can choose. Oh, yeah.
That's does with Media Composer as well.
Yeah, that's what I like when they. I don't care about if they have a subscription, as long as they give you the option of, I'll buy this version, I'll stay locked at this version. If I need updates, I'll pay for the updates going forward.
We've been toying with that idea for years as well. Like, maybe we should do a subscription for Hedge if you need that, because we sell a lot of project licenses, people that need it for just a month. And it's quite a hassle to keep buying new licenses and then new license keys. So we are thinking about doing a hop-on, hop-off Hedge license.
But Hedge isn't that expensive. Hedge isn't that expensive.
That's always relative. For some people, it is expensive. For some people, it definitely isn't.
Well, the upgrades aren't. The upgrades, they're not that expensive. Once you buy into it, the upgrade for year to year are not that expensive. Yep. I mean, I have Waves plugins. I'm sure you're familiar with what they are. I've had them for years, and they have the Waves update plan, WUP. And I always, first off, I don't get it when mine expires. I'll wait for a couple of months if I'm not using the plugins that much until I need something that they have. The other thing is I'll wait till it goes on sale, and it always goes on sale in the summertime or August, say $50 or something like that. And that's when I'll spring for it. So, is there anything we missed? I think we've talked about everything.
I think so too.
Fantastic. So, exclusive announcement, Hedge for iPad or iOS. Is it iPhone and iPad?
Not sure yet.
Not sure yet.
Definitely iPads. Definitely
iPads. And the other thing is the brand new Drive, Postlab Drive. Is it out now, or is it just coming out, or it's out now? Released today. So that's 2 exclusives you got on this show. That's fantastic. And people can follow you on Twitter at Hedge
for Video.
Hedge for Video. It used to be Hedge for Mac. Now it's Hedge for Video. And then the Postlab is at Postlab app, I think.
That's it.
That's it. And of course, online you can go to hedge.video, right? Is that what it is?
Yep.
Hedge.video. See, I remembered all these things. I'm surprised. Too many URLs. Very good, Paul. Yeah, that's the other thing. Just go Google it. I certainly appreciate you coming on here today on Final Cut Pro Radio.
Thanks for having me.
You've had some great updates, and I look forward to the future with Hedge and Postlab. I'll talk to you later.
Speak soon. Thanks for having me, Richard.
You're welcome.
Have a good evening.